Okay, welcome to Office Hours. It's a 30-minute webinar to help you successfully achieve SIP certified. And this is our final of 6 webinars where from December through now, we have been online with experts who have gone through the program, and we have gone over, well, now we're going to be finishing the last of the 14 chapters of the standards, and we are here to answer your questions as we go along. So some general tips for completing your application this year. Do the requirements first, since these are often the more difficult questions and you must achieve them to get certified. And when you go through and you answer your management enhancement questions, answer the ones that you can right now and keep a running list of the ones that you can achieve later and come back to them. We also recommend using the photos list. It's a list of all the standards questions that require photos. And you can grab this list and take it out with you and go around your property and take all your pictures at once. And that link is in the chat box, so you can check it out there. And for those of you who are new to the database, I'll show you what it looks like really quick and what the different icons mean. So this icon here, the little leaf, that means that this question pertains to vineyards. The tank means it goes for wineries, and when it's both, it goes for both. The calendar icon means that there's a date box that must be completed. The double arrow icon means that it's a management group question. So if you have multiple properties, you can create a management group and you can answer all these questions at the same time. And then down here, the handshaking icon, that means that as well as being documented, this question will be verified during your on-site inspection. All right, so each one of these office hour webinars will focus on 2 to 3 chapters, and we'll have time at the end for questions and answers. We'll call out the standards by number as we go through them so that you'll know which questions we're talking about. And while each webinar focuses on specific chapters, feel free to bring any questions that you have, but please refer to them by number so that we can pull them up. And all of these webinars will be recorded and posted to the info hub on sipcertified.org. If it's your first time getting SIP certified, know that it takes about 60 to 80 hours to document all the standards your first year. And once you're certified, you can expect to invest just 20 hours each year. And also know that you are not alone. We are here to help answer your questions, provide you with resources, and help any way we can along the way. So this 6th and final office hours webinar will cover chapters 8, purchasing, recycling, and waste reduction, and 13, business management. And we're joined today by Lucas Pope. He's the Director of Vineyard Operations at Coastal Vineyard Services, and he's been involved with Vineyard Team for several years. He served as our Vice President and our President on our Board of Directors. Am I missing anything there, Lucas?
No, happy participant.
Great. Okay, well, yeah, thank you for joining us. So we will go over chapter 8 first. So what stood out to you in this chapter as far as requirements, difficult questions?
Well, the whole chapter is really interesting because it is part of being sustainable and expanding a recycling program and knowing where your waste stream is and try and minimize what waste stream there is from both vineyards and winery. I noticed a lot of the standards have to do with winery operations, and they're all really pertinent as you look at the management enhancements. Some are not very difficult to do. Some can be a little bit trickier, and some are, a philosophical decision has to be made basically on which way your brand is represented, if you're going to be really, really green, or if you're going to stick to a more traditional marketing plan, I guess I'd say. The biggest one that was really interesting for me is way down. So we'll get into it in a little bit, but ultimately being really conscious of where your waste stream is makes a huge difference. And that's why the requirements are written the way they are, just to make sure that everybody who's trying to be SIP certified is very conscious of what comes after you consume a good, or if there are leftover things from production and how they are dealt with. And if you try your very best to get procure products that have recycled content. It is quite interesting working with, there's some things that are actually really difficult. And Whitney and I we've talked many times before on 8.1.2 and recycling bird netting and drip tube. Used to be extremely commonplace. Now it's kind of hard to find somebody who's going to recycle plastic, because the plastics industry, it's an evolving business, and it's really interesting. I've heard of people doing it. It can be difficult to do. So that would be one management enhancement that is tricky, that may require a little extra time to make sure that you're able to find somebody who's willing to recycle plastic with you. I believe there's somebody in Santa Maria who I've heard of doing it for those Central Coast folks who are, in Santa Barbara, San Luis, and maybe Monterey County. Outside the area, I don't really know if they're, who you would use, but if you do some research, you'll be able to find somebody hopefully who can recycle your bird netting and your drip tube, which is one of the biggest wasteful products that we see out there in the vineyard side of things. As we go down the list, it's kind of interesting to work through how your waste stream is, and if you have people you're cooperatively working with. And usually, in all honesty, waste, I don't know how you put it, waste facilities or municipal waste people are always looking, they're turning a profit off your recycling. So they're oftentimes very happy to work with you to try and figure out how to streamline your waste collection or your recycling collection, and try and help facilitate. So oftentimes we see people with separate recycling bins and trash bins. It's pretty much standard here in California. The new one that I've seen a lot of more lately are the compostable, and separating compostable items from traditionally recycled items. And there are people going to the extent of being able to go through and recycle those compostable items, not only like food waste, but like hummus waste and other things, and then go through a proper compost cycle and then reapply to your vineyards to enhance soil health. So, it's a far-reaching effects on a lot of the recycling side of things. It is really interesting to get down into some of the standards like training your workers. 8.1.5, it may not seem like a very important task, but it's really simple to do. And just communicating your recycling plan, because you need, the standard is you must have that written recycling program. And if you're able to communicate that to the people in the field who are actually executing, whether it be vineyard or winery, it becomes really easy to score some points on your management enhancements, because everybody's aware of the goal of the recycling plan. Making sure batteries and more harmful like oil, tires, batteries, pesticide containers is a huge one. It used to be really tricky, and it's not so tricky anymore. As long as you triple rinse, you puncture, we try and crush at the same time, package into bags with like goods, like pesticide containers. They'll often take them at a municipal waste recycling plant. And it's not as big a deal as it once was for, like, it used to be considered hazardous waste, but not so bad anymore. And then there are other, really, as you get down into some of the winery standards, sample bottles for tasting, are they washed and reused? It's used to not be so common. People used to use a lot of plastic and just toss it. And now we're seeing a lot of wineries transition back to more recyclable glass bottles with closures, and they can run them through a washing cycle and reuse them. You also have, even into tasting rooms, recycling bottles that are, you'd think it's completely standard practice, but it's not always that common, recycling the bottles from tasting. There's even a thing in here about a standard about repurposing natural cork. Wasn't something I ever thought of before. And then I started to look at how many products are made of cork. There's cork flooring, there's cork in your shoes, there's cork all over the place. So there is this, if you go through the extra effort to recycle your natural cork, it's going back and repurposed into something. It's not being thrown out in this massive, the space of recycling and just disappearing somewhere. It actually gets repurposed. And oftentimes I've seen it before where there is a specific collection vessel for just corks. And you can work with, if you're a major winery, you can work with one of the cork recyclers, and they will provide you with somewhere to put your cork so that they know that it's secure for the next product. Another thing that's been really interesting, I've seen quite a bit of transition from uh, styrofoam over the last several years. People have stopped shipping in styrofoam. The only times I see styrofoam shippers nowadays really comes in when you're getting with an oddball sized bottle, magnums or double magnums or something that it doesn't make sense to retool an entire line. They're still using styrofoam for shippers, but otherwise we're looking at pulp shippers all the time now. Almost all the wine we receive or ship out goes in some sort of a recycled paper product. And it's a very easy way that the whole entire industry has transitioned to be more green and more sustainable. So it's been fun to see these, it's not necessary. I'm not going to say that the industry is completely changed because of the standards, but it is interesting to see people adopt the standards and that become more acceptable or accepted as kind of an industry standard. Some of them, I mean, some of these standards are so easy, like scrap paper or using double-sided printing. It just seems like a no-brainer to be able to score those points. The barrels, unused barrels, oftentimes you see people make planters out of them, repurpose. I just saw a winery, you could go in and buy segments of a used barrel and you could use it for barbecuing. And I thought that was a really unique idea, or a fire starter kindling style thing. Actually, I swear I saw some kids who actually adopted the project of where they went and hand split the barrels to start fire, like a fire starter bundle, which was really cool. Because I don't know, we burn a fire at home and over winter to keep warm. So I thought that was a really unique idea to think outside the box and repurpose. An annual waste audit. That is quite an interesting one. The 8.2.1. It is really interesting when you do an audit to actually see where the waste streams go. And a lot of the standards in the whole program, as it was written and is constantly updated, is to make people aware of what's going on. And if you're aware, then you can take an action in order to be more sustainable. And this one is one that really comes to mind in the sections that I was reviewing as a really important key. Because if you know where your waste stream is headed post-consumer, you being the consumer or the winery or the vineyard, it can really help you make decisions on how to train people and how to implement programs that may not cost anything. It just takes an effort. And I think that standard is really, really, it may be a little bit time intensive to try and figure out what your waste stream looks like, but it's the dividends pay off in how sustainable a vineyard can be or a winery can be based upon knowing that. Some of them farther down, nothing really struck me as incredibly difficult to do. None of the standards did. If you look at some of the other chapters, there are some really, the standards are not extremely difficult, but it does take a little bit more time and thought. And maybe it's just because this day and age, we're so in tune, and especially as I'm sitting in California, I'm speaking of being in California, the recycling bins and green waste bins and that kind of stuff is a daily part of our lives here. So it doesn't seem very difficult to transition that into your work life. It's what you do at home, but things like rewashable utensils. I actually didn't even think of that until I visited Niner Winery and had lunch with their staff. And I was wondering, oh man, nothing here is plastic. It's all real silverware. What would the cause or what would the reasoning be behind that? And then read the standards and see that 75%, or not the standard, sorry, the enhancement for 8.2.7 and the break room plates and cups and utensils, they have a dishwasher in their break room. And it's, Halter was the same way. A lot of people who are committed to sustainability, it doesn't take much extra effort if you're able to plan ahead and make less of a waste stream post your use. Let's see. We get down into packaging materials, which is really interesting. That's primarily winery related, but one thing I found extremely interesting in here, and this is where I kind of was alluding to earlier with a marketing or commitment to sustainability, would be 8.3.3 lightweight glass. You want to talk about a hot button issue, because there is some mystique, or how do I phrase it? There's a assumed value with a heavy bottle, a heavy glass bottle. And I think that certain segments of the industry, it's been really hard to transition away from really heavy glass, just because the perceived value in a heavier bottle on the 60 to 85 plus dollar bottle range, we've seen a slow transition from heavy glass to a lighter glass. But in a certain price segment, the 60 and below, people have adopted this lighter glass. You save on carbon footprint producing the glass, you save on shipping cost, you save on, it's less material to recycle, and ultimately, the consumer really has not shown a difference in choice between the two glasses. If you're going for really, really heavy bottles, sometimes the really heavy bottles get me. You're like pouring your last glass and you're like, oh, there's more in there. Oh, no. Oh, it's done. Oh, shoot, that bottle weighs a ton.
Yeah.
And there's something, it's all in our heads, I believe, to the heavy, heavy glass. But it is interesting to see people really start to transition away from that. And I think it's a wave of the future, as especially with certain colors of glass. It's really hard to get certain colors of glass. So lighter weight bottles will, I think, be adopted. There's certain, exemptions to that, like champagne or sparkling wine glass. It has to hold pressure, so it has to be a certain thickness in order to hold the pressure of the carbonation inside. But ultimately, more and more people, I do think, will end up going towards lighter glass. If that wasn't a tangent, though.
A valuable one, though.
Yeah. Packaging for the minimum size allowable. This is a really interesting one, because I'm on the vineyard side, but I'm also, my wife and I have a wine brand. We own our own label. And having boxes that fit just the right size and also really tight around, it's been a really interesting, as we look at our own packaging, how we reflect on what we want to do. And using the minimum size and trying to get everything secure it's almost a no-brainer. It really is interesting to see how even shipping rates can change. You're shipping less overall volume, so you can save money and be more sustainable by using less material. So it's just, some of those kind of things are very, very almost without thinking. I don't want to say no brainer, but really it can be. The paperless policies are really interesting. It almost seems like another one of those situations where the world is transitioning away from paper, but you do find in the farming industry and wineries, there's a number of record keeping pieces that are more difficult without paper. But we have seen people transitioning. There's new softwares. I'm a personal example is our record keeping for our equipment checklists in the field. We have paper copies because we have copies that somebody has to physically fill out who might not be computer literate, and then hand in, and then there's a whole process to inspections, making sure that if it's client's equipment, inspections are relayed to them. But we're working with a new company to try and use a QR code with a smartphone. It seems like it is going to be an easy transition. We're right in the middle of it right now, where you can scan a QR code when you get into a tractor. It brings up a checklist on your phone, and you check yes or no. Is the oil level good? Do you have tires inflated? Just the simple checklist, and that can get pushed out to everybody. It's the implementation is interesting because we have a unique checklist for our company, and each company has a different unique checklist of what they're asking each individual and operator to check. But it's one way that we're working on to try and be more green, because the number of copies and paper generated is ridiculous. So we're really trying to fall under a better paperless policy.
And do you guys use the software for your QR creations and then the checklist that it goes to, or do you use like Google Forms?
This one we're actually using we're using a specific company. We're using IntelliCulture because we're using GPS mapping. It gets into a whole bunch more interesting utilization of equipment and being able to tell infield time versus idle time. So we minimize our overall fuel consumption and carbon footprint. It also helps us to make sure that we are operating at the correct speed when we're spraying. We make sure that's one issue we just came up on. It was different speeds during spraying based upon different blocks, and there's no rhyme or reason for it. So going back and retraining, does that tractor driver need a new training so that they make sure that they're calibrated to the exact speed that we want, and then we can double check that. Therefore, we're not wasting pesticides. We're not getting extra time in the field, no extra wear and tear on tractors. It's been really eye-opening, but that's another whole nother tangent. So do you, Whitney, have you had questions on any of the other waste stream type questions?
A lot on what you mentioned earlier, the netting and the drip hose and all that. A lot of questions about finding resources for that. As far as these other packaging and recycling, not a whole lot. I think this one is pretty straightforward. People seem to have an all right time with it.
Yeah, perfect. Well, that's good, because we don't want the standards to be unaccomplishable, but we're always trying to update to stay not only relevant, but make sure that everything in the program is changing with the changing world we're in, and evolving. The evolution of the whole SIP certified program has been
right. And then that's part of our annual review of the standards, plus the peer review every 5 years, where we go through everything and just make sure everything's up to date. And on top of those, so a lot of what we bring to the committee is on a spreadsheet of things that come out throughout the year. People have questions about, or think that we should consider. We add it to the spreadsheet, we bring it to the committee, and we talk about maybe implementing it or changing some things, or maybe just providing more resources and guidance for members. So if anybody has any ideas along the way, like reach out, let us know, and we can try to figure it out.
It is fun to get the call from Whitney. You never know which standards this one on. Oh man. And then it is also interesting because all the questions are addressed. That's a really important point to hit, is every time you get a question, usually I would think you'd make 3 to 4 phone calls right away to try and see what somebody who's been dealing with the program for a long time is going to do or say for an implementation or an example of how to solve a problem. And then we have the TAC meetings where all of them get revisited with the technical advisory committee. And you get a bunch of people in a room who've been doing this for a long time and are steering the standards. And it's pretty interesting to see the questions that come up. And oftentimes, some of us have dealt with the problems in creative ways. So, it's just important to know if you do have a question that it does get looked at by multiple sets of eyes, and a focused group to try and even see if the standards are relevant, or we're constantly questioning what we're doing to make sure that we have the strongest, most robust, sustainable certification program there is out there.
The fun journey.
Yeah.
Ready to hop to 13?
Chapter 13. So chapter 13 was really interesting to me when I was first starting this whole journey, because it seems like so many of the sustainable and the organic programs are based upon farming practices only. And it was just kind of an interesting, like, why would you need 13? Why would you need it? But ultimately, being part of an all-inclusive sustainable program means that not only are you doing things sustainable in the field, not only is your social equity sustainable, not only are every bit of the organization a part of it, but the business management, because if you're not a sustainable business, you won't be in business in a few years, and therefore negates the entire program. So these standards truly are a great operating guide. And I could understand it might be hard for a mom and pop, but really this day and age, the economics of being a sustainable organization are so critical. And as you know, right now, I would say the number one question I get managing vineyards all comes back to pertaining to budgets and where we stand with a multi-year budget or an annual budget and projections for the future and fruit sales and how it all ties together. So this is a very important chapter, even though I may have earlier in my career not thought it, as important as it is, but having a budget, plain and simple, should be the basis for all businesses. Making sure your budget is up to date, annual costs are factored in, because in the field, what we see most of the time would be fluctuations in labor cost. Or fluctuations in fuel cost. And can you try and predict those based upon a certain percentage increase? In the winery, you're dealing with so many different pieces. You've got, bottles, closures, cork, you have chemicals, you have grapes, and all these things are based upon a commodity's price. So they're constantly fluctuating. So it's really important to have at least a budget for a guideline and then constantly updating that budget if possible. For a winery to have a marketing and sales plan, it's not if you make it, they will buy it. That's not the case all the time. You can't just fall forward on blind faith. You really do need to have an idea of which direction you want to go. And really a 5-year plan would be ideal if you can put it together. Because if you're not basing your production volume based upon its projected sales, you might not be very successful. It's always nice that if you outsell your volume, you sell out, that'd be amazing, but that's not the case for 99% of the wineries out there. Winery records, that's by law. So if you are in a winery looking at losses and whatnot and making sure that you have all your documentation, pretty important, pretty standard actually in the industry. It's absolutely standard. So the inventory management is really interesting. Because there is some manipulation. So the 13.1.5, there is a little bit of manipulation that I see having worked with many different wineries, but everybody's tracking because legally you're obliged to. You have to fill out a 702 every month and make sure that you're tracking all of your wines and where they are and what state of production they're in. So those standards are pretty much something that you're going to be doing anyways if you're in business, but the cost over time is really interesting. Budget reviews monthly. Those are pretty standard. If you're a solo operator, it might be wise to go down and make sure you have a financial planner or a business advisor. And maybe not monthly, but at least every other month, check in with them and make sure you're on track. That way you can plan for the second half of the year, or you can plan for the first half of the following year to make sure that you're on your sales or spending targets and adjust them so that you make sure you will be successful in business. The succession plan thing is a really interesting one. A lot of people don't want to think about what happens when they're gone, but oftentimes I've seen where there's a very successful business and maybe somebody doesn't have kids, or maybe their kids aren't interested at all. Like to have a succession plan, or what I was always told, when you get into either a partnership or business, you need to know your exit before you start. That way you're not caught off guard if you hit a certain threshold and it's time to either shut down or sell, or you are doing better than you expected and it's time to reinvest in your business, or is it time to maybe pay yourself a little bit more? All comes into that succession plan of what the ultimate goal is for your business and how you can work towards that goal. If you know you're going to sell, there are certain things you can do. We've seen it time and time again where a really good winery ends up planning ahead, building sales volumes and distribution networks, and then selling to one of the bigger wine conglomerates. It's been kind of a hot topic in Paso the last couple of years. I mean, there's a lot of acres and, I would say close to 1 million cases of wine produced that have been sold from small startups, family-owned businesses to larger conglomerates. And if that's your goal, there's kind of a tried and true path to get there. So if you can take a little bit of time and just have an idea, and the succession plan really does need to be updated every couple of years because your goals do change every couple of years and your financial situation changes every couple of years. So maybe you're doing worse than you expected and you need to figure out your succession plan sooner, or maybe you're doing much better than expected and you want to ride the wave and stay in for longer. Really important to plan ahead for that. Oh, business continuity for disasters or IT failures. It's really good to have a plan. Sometimes if something disastrous happens, you just kind of figure it out. But if you have a plan in place before, you have a guideline, which means you've at least thought about the process. And that comes back to, how the whole standards work. And we're thinking about the whole process of being sustainable and how to implement that best. Long-term development plans for vineyards, extremely important. Crop insurance, it's important for certain places, less important for others. The redevelopment for your vineyard, if the old standard was 30 years, the new standard's 25 years of vineyard life. So every 5 years or so, you should redevelop roughly 20% of your vineyard. Some people can do it in one fell swoop, but if you're out of full production for a full turn of a vineyard, you're talking, harvest, and then the following year, 3 full years out of production, that's a pretty hard storm to weather, unless you have some other income that's not based upon farming or winery. So having that long-term redevelopment plan for your vineyard is extremely important, something to think about and ultimately plan ahead for, because vineyards do have a life. USDA considers us a non permanent crop, and that kind of is a very interesting idea that even a government agency knows that our crops are going to turn. Right. So it is imperative to think about, because no matter what, we can try our best to keep viruses out and pests out, but inevitably something's going to come in. There's going to be a next wave, and something's going to end up. We talk about this. We talked about this last week at the tailgate. Winds 1103 going to have its little problem in its armor because it's kind of a silver bullet for a lot of people. But AXR1 was too, and phylloxera comes in and wipes people out. Or there's this unforeseen, who knows, virus, pest. Who knows what's going to happen? So making sure you have a plan for the future is really important.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, yeah, I think that's about all the way through it. So yeah, I'll just open it up real quickly for Q&A. I'll open this box and just kind of sit for a second. Sorry, once I find it. But yeah, so this was the last office hours of this year. So we are going to start them up again in December and do another December through May run, 1 per month. We'll put out the registration links and the announcements in the member tips email and on the SIP certified website, sometimes on the Vineyard Team newsletter too, but kind of more SIP focused. But yeah, so of course, like we said earlier, it's going to take about 60 to 80 hours to complete SIP certified your first year, a lot less the following years. Any questions along the way, reach out to us, and we have lots of very knowledgeable people like Lucas here to help us out if we get stuck on something. So we appreciate your help, Lucas.
Oh, absolutely. Happy to be part of the program.
Yeah. Okay, well, no questions are coming through, so I guess we'll call it.
Sounds good. All right. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you, Lucas. Appreciate it.
Hey.